You're listening to Procurement 6, the weekly podcast from the team at Art of Procurement that summarizes this week in procurement in just 6 short segments.
Hi there, I'm Helen Mackenzie, and today is Friday, July 21st, 2023.
6.
I'm busy preparing this week for my summer vacation, and one of the key things in that process is a checklist that I've developed over a number of years. Having a checklist really helps remove the worry from the process of packing and preparing. If it's on the checklist and I've ticked it off, it's done. If not, it's on my to-do list. Having a checklist for things at work is also something that I do. I've even got one for preparing and recording Procurement 6. Checklists help me remember small things like spell checking a document before it's sent through, to bigger parts of the business process like ensuring that all suppliers have been invited to submit proposals for an RFP. So my tip for you this week is, why not try a checklist? Get it set up, put it into practice, and take the stress out of any process.
5.
In this week's podcast, Philip Idson sat down with Barbara Farouk at SAP Sapphire in Orlando to discuss the latest Economist research that SAP had commissioned. The report's called Decoding Confidence in the Procurement Function, and the research is something that SAP commission every year. In the section I've chosen for you today from the podcast, Barbara reflects on the findings last year compared to this, and how much things have changed. Let's take a listen.
The stat in the survey that's most fascinating, and I keep reading it over and over again because I cannot believe it, is that last year, the number one driver for digital transformation was user experience. Mm-hmm. And that was not a surprise. Yeah. That has been the case for several years. We've been hearing it for probably a decade. Yeah. Right? Get on mobile, make it easier for me.
Easier buying experience.
Mm-hmm. Amazon-like experience, 3 clicks and I go, and that's what my business stakeholders want, et cetera. And we've been hearing it over and over again. This year, the number one driver for digital transformation was spend visibility. Right? Let me know what I'm buying, where I'm buying it. Mm-hmm. Supply chain visibility. Yeah. Give me a view of my supply chain. It was number 6 last year, and it became number 1 this year within a 12-month time frame. That is a remarkable jump, right?
Do you feel that that's driven by organizations that don't have any visibility into spend and supply chain, or whether it's driven by those that have it but they realized it wasn't enough and they're actually wanting to go to the next level?
I think it's the latter, if I had to guess. I mean, if I was to make a prediction based on, I think, over the past 10, 15 years, through various tools and capabilities, organizations have,
Because that was what was interesting to me. When
through
you
Excel,
see it,
through Excel and other tools that are out there, have figured out some spend reporting that works for them. I think they're just saying it's not good enough. Mm-hmm. I think there's many sources of spend. I want to be able to report on all of it. It needs to be current, right? I mean, I was talking to a CPO last year when the Suez Canal crisis happened, and it became symbolic of this moment where procurement can get in and supply chain officers can sort of signify the importance. And this particular chief procurement officer said, well, my CEO called me. He's like, do we have any supply on that ship? Mm-hmm. Was the question. He's like, I don't know, right? But it sort of he said, I thought my reporting was very good until I got that request, and then I was making 15 million phone calls trying to get to the answer. So I think it's not so much that there's not any visibility. I think they're saying it needs to be better. And I think it's also sort of representative of, if I can say, maybe a general level of frustration with enterprise software that organizations have, which is that on the one hand, we're talking about robots taking over the world and everything being written automatically through ChatGPT. And on the other hand, I have all this data. I just want to report on where things are, what my supply chain is like. Give me 2-3 tiers down of any vulnerabilities that are there. And I can't seem to get it, right? So I think that dissonance sort of leads to this type of feedback in the survey.
So, we've moved from user experience to spend visibility in just 12 months. That just shows the competing priorities that we have to deal with in procurement, doesn't it? Check out the full conversation between Phil and Barbara using the link in the show notes.
4.
In last week's episode of the Sourcing Hero podcast, Kelly Barner welcomed Luca Yiannakopoulos, who started an organisation during COVID and which has developed into Grapevine, a company that addresses miscommunications between suppliers and buyers in the healthcare industry. Now, Luca shares the backstory of the company Pandemic Relief Supply that he founded without meaning to during COVID, and it was based on his desire to be a force for good during the most difficult days of the pandemic. He tells Kelly why 40% of healthcare industry spending is wasted due to supply chain inefficiencies and manual human errors, but how there's the potential to improve transparency and that can reduce costs and improve buyer-supplier relationships. Now, Luca's got a really interesting take on the potential for procurement and supply chain to make a difference in such an important sector. So why not check out the podcast using the link in the show notes.
This is Procurement 6 from Art of Procurement. To get notified every time an episode is published, go to artofprocurement.com/subscribe. 3.
I was interested to see a post on LinkedIn this week from Sahina Ansari, who calls herself the procurement holic, and it's about the overlooked soft skills that propel procurement to success. In her list of 10 soft skills, Sahina has everything from risk assessment and mitigation to active listening, and there were quite a few additions to the list in the comments on her post too. Now, many people supported the inclusion of active listening in the list, while others suggested that adding storytelling and crafting a narrative to what procurement needs to have. So what are the soft skills that you think procurement can't live without? Use the link to Sahina's post in the show notes to add your comments into the discussion.
2.
In this week's Style P for Procurement, Kelly Barner takes us on the journey from Industry 1.0 to Industry 5.0. My goodness, are we at 5.0 already? Surely not. And importantly, what does that mean for procurement? So if you're like me and you didn't realise we'd started another epoch of industrial history, this week's Style P for Procurement podcast is essential listening. What is Industry 5.0? How did we get there? And where next? Listen to Kelly's procurement history lesson and take a peek into the future. Use the link in the show notes to find out more.
1.
Hooray! Our AOP Live session with Brian Sawalski, Chief Operating Officer at Guidant Global, at the end of July is almost here. Reserve your spot so you can learn best practices on how to design and manage a successful external talent programme. Now, Brian will share a real-world case study on how one financial services company faced this challenge head-on and used the opportunity to elevate procurement in the process. And that was without any disruptions to their internal team or stakeholders. So it's a brilliant case study and I'm so glad he's sharing it. So join us on July 27th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time for this AOP Live session with Brian. And it's called A Deliberate Path to Success Through Comprehensive Talent Procurement. Register now by heading on over to artofprocurement.com/calendar or use the link in the show notes.
Thanks for listening. We'll be back next Friday at 6 a.m. U.S. Eastern Time. If you've enjoyed this pod, help us grow and tell your peers to search for Procurement 6 wherever they get their podcasts.